His name was Albert H. Monroe, 90 years old, living alone on the outskirts of Atlanta. Each morning followed the same pattern: wake before sunrise, raise the American flag, and brew exactly 1 cup of black tea. His modest house had been his residence since 1952, its walls quietly witnessing decades of solitude. Few people knew that Albert had served in World War II and took part in the liberation of Nazi concentration camps in 1945. He never spoke of it. No children, no surviving relatives remained to hear those tales anyway. His reserved nature and polite nod when greeted by neighbors gave away nothing of his history. Inside his wallet, Albert always carried a weathered photograph: 4 young men in uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder before departing for Europe. The edges had worn smooth after decades of being handled. The faces had faded but were still recognizable. It was the only image he had from that time. That Wednesday morning was different. Albert awoke earlier than usual, shined his old dress shoes until they sparkled, and carefully put on his only suit, a navy blue one he'd bought in 1978. He tied his tie with care, combed his thin white hair, and pinned a single medal to his jacket's lapel. Before leaving, he tucked the photo into his inner pocket and picked up a single white carnation from a florist he'd visited the previous day. The bus driver helped him climb aboard, noticing his formal clothing. "Special occasion, sir?" the driver asked. "Just paying respects to old friends," Albert said gently. When he arrived at the National Military Museum, a sleek, modern structure of glass and steel, Albert paused a moment, inhaling deeply. Nearly 4 decades had passed since his last visit. The museum had been redesigned, expanded, and modernized. Nothing looked familiar anymore. At the entrance, a young staff member in a sharp uniform greeted him with trained politeness. "Ticket and ID, please." Albert pulled out the photo instead. "I've come to find their names," he said, voice hardly more than a whisper. The attendant glanced at the photo with little interest. "Do you have a veteran's ID, sir?" Albert shook his head. "I never re-registered after 46. "I'm sorry," the attendant replied, pointing to a sign nearby. "Museum policy requires valid identification. No ID, no entry." Albert stood still holding the photograph. His expression wasn't pleading or upset, just weary. A line of high school students wearing matching field trip shirts was forming behind him, growing restless. One boy whispered to another, "The old guy's confused," prompting a few teens to chuckle. A security guard walked up. "Sir, I need you to step aside. You're delaying the line." Still, Albert didn't move. "Sir," the attendant repeated more sternly, "without proper ID, I can't let you in. Please move aside." At last, Albert nodded gently, returned the photo to his pocket, and turned away. No protest, no fuss, just quiet acceptance of what seemed to be the way things worked now. Procedures over people, rules above remembrance. As he slowly descended the steps, one girl from the student group looked back at him. Something about his grace and rejection struck her. Silently, she lifted her phone and snapped his picture. Good people often pay the steepest price, but sometimes it's the only road they know how to walk. Can a single act challenge a system that's lost its understanding of sacrifice? As Albert Monroe made his way down the museum stairs, a woman broke from the student group and followed him. Her name tag read, "Sophia Greer, history teacher." "Excuse me, sir," she called. When Albert turned, she continued, "I couldn't help but notice. Did you serve?" Albert studied her features for a moment, searching for any hint of ridicule or sympathy. Seeing none, he carefully retrieved the photograph from his pocket. "I'm the only one left," he said, pointing to the youngest face in the photo. Then his worn finger moved across the others. "Johnson, Martinez, Willis. They died saving me during the camp liberation. I just wanted to see if they made the wall." Miss Greer's expression softened. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the photo. Albert hesitated, then handed it to her. She examined it, noting the unit patch and date, April 1944. "Have you tried contacting Veterans Affairs? They may help with your records." Albert's smile was gentle, not bitter. "3 times. They said my file was lost in the '73 fire. Without records." His voice drifted off. It's all right. I know the truth. That's enough. That evening, Miss Greer posted Albert's story and photo on social media. Today, my students and I saw something that broke my heart, she wrote, recounting the experience. By morning, her post had gone viral. Thousands of shares, comments, and reactions. Not all were kind. A popular conservative news outlet ran a piece titled, 90-Year-Old and the Foggy Military File, Stolen Valor or Bureaucratic Error. They questioned why a real veteran wouldn't have proper proof after all these years. The museum released a statement. While we deeply respect all who served, our safety policies are in place for everyone. These guidelines are enforced uniformly. The comments sections lit up with debate. Regulations versus reverence, safety over sentiment. Amid all the noise, Albert remained unaware. His old TV rarely on, his rotary phone never rang. Meanwhile, a retired Marine colonel who was a noted military historian read the story. Miss Greer's post mentioning the name Albert Monroe stirred a long-buried memory. He dug through his personal files and uncovered a reference to a private Albert Monroe in documents tied to Operation Buccaneer Camp. The colonel swiftly sent this discovery to a military office in Washington. Within hours, a senior official authenticated the record and forwarded it to four-star General Arnold Beck, the current Army Chief of Staff. While debates raged online, some accusing Albert of seeking attention, others calling for respect for all elderly claiming to be veterans, Albert sat quietly in his kitchen. He delicately reattached a faded letter to his refrigerator, a solemn tradition on this date. The letter, written in a firm hand, simply read, "If anyone asks, I live for others." That evening, he placed a single carnation in a glass beside his bed and whispered 4 names before drifting to sleep, his own and 3 others the world seemed to have forgotten. No one recognizes the cost of compassion. No one sees the solitude of those who once saved hundreds but now face locked gates like intruders. If you still believe honor needs no identification, type honor. A week after being denied entry, Albert received an official letter from the museum's administration. After reviewing your inquiry, we regret to inform you that without sufficient documentation, we cannot confirm your military service. Your case has been deemed ineligible for special review. The letter carried a printed signature and an enclosed pamphlet on how to request replacement military records. No personal message, no phone number to call, just a formal verdict, delivered in 3 sterile paragraphs. Albert read the letter twice, then folded it with care and placed it in a small wooden box, along with other mementos too painful to display, yet too valuable to throw away. On top, he set a photograph of 4 young soldiers. "Maybe," he murmured to the empty room, "it's time I join you boys." That night, for the first time in decades, he didn't set his alarm. Monday morning brought strange activity at the National Military Museum before its usual opening time. A convoy of 3 black SUVs bearing military plates arrived at the entrance. Museum staff exchanged puzzled glances as security guards received sudden updates through their earpieces. Right at 9 a.m., 4-star General Arnold Beck exited the lead vehicle wearing full formal dress and crisp white gloves. Ignoring the museum director who rushed to welcome him, General Beck moved straight into the main hall. "Clear the entrance area," he commanded. "Shut down the secure checkpoint immediately." The entire museum hushed. Employees froze, visitors whispered. Guards moved briskly to follow orders. "I'm here to escort someone," the general declared, his voice resonating off marble walls. A hero who never should have been turned away. A staffer hesitantly stepped forward. "Sir, may I ask who we're expecting?" General Beck locked eyes with him and replied, "Albert Monroe." 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled to the curb. Albert stepped out slowly, puzzled by a phone call he'd received that morning asking for his presence. He wore the same suit as before, though now less precisely fastened. The carnation was again pinned to his lapel. When he reached the top step, General Beck came out personally to greet him. The 4-star general halted, stood at full attention, and offered a flawless salute. Albert's hand quivered as he returned the gesture, muscle memory from 75 years ago guiding him. "I don't understand," Albert said softly. "I'm nobody now." General Beck lowered his salute. "You're wrong, sir. You're the reason my father survived to have a family." The revelation left everyone within earshot stunned. Speaking loudly enough for all to hear, the general explained. In April 1945, Private First Class Albert Monroe was among the first American troops to enter Buchenwald concentration camp. When 3 SS guards attempted to execute a group of prisoners instead of surrendering, Private Monroe and 3 fellow soldiers stepped in at extreme risk to themselves. His tone softened. "My father was one of those prisoners. He weighed 89 pounds and couldn't stand without help. Your actions saved him. And 17 others." General Beck took out a small box from his pocket. "Your service records were indeed lost in the 1973 fire, but my father's account wasn't. He wrote everything down before he passed." Inside the box was the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration. It was approved in 1947, but by then, you had quietly returned to civilian life. It's 75 years overdue. The museum staff stood stunned. Among a school group that had seen Albert turned away days earlier, some quietly wiped away tears. The security guard who'd told Albert to step aside now removed his cap in respect. The attendant who had denied him entry approached, eyes reddened. "Sir, I truly apologize for—" Albert gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were doing your job, I understand?" General Beck's voice rang clear. "Some men don't require an ID card to prove their bravery. An entire nation stands as proof of their sacrifice." As Albert was finally led inside to see the names of his fallen friends, the museum director announced new changes. Entry policies would be reevaluated immediately. More importantly, a new exhibit would be created, The Forgotten Heroes, dedicated to those without surviving documentation. The students who had once laughed now stood solemnly, hands clasped, watching as history righted itself. When truth comes to light, those who once turned away stand in stunned silence. Justice may not always be swift, but it is never absent. If you believe in delayed but deserved justice, type justice. In the months that followed, Albert Monroe declined all media attention and turned down all offers of money for his story. The medal he received wasn't displayed in his house. It was donated to the museum, placed next to the photograph of the 4 young men. Albert requested only one thing: permission to visit the museum every year on April 11th, the anniversary of his friend's sacrifice. The museum not only approved this request but also created an annual ceremony on that date to honor veterans whose service had been lost to time or circumstance. On his first visit, Albert brought 1 white carnation for each name etched into the memorial wall. He spoke to no one, no speech, no ceremony, just silent reverence, a private exchange between past and present that needed no audience. At home, Albert created a small memorial on his bedside table. The folded American flag General Beck had given him, the old black and white photo, and a handwritten note from the general that read, "You gave us freedom. We owe you remembrance." The museum evolved too. A new staff training program taught how to identify less visible markers of service, subtle postures, ways of speaking, and specific knowledge that couldn't easily be faked. They rolled out a dignity protocol for elderly visitors without documentation, with alternate methods for verifying identity. The student who had once mocked Albert wrote in her final school essay, "I laughed at the wrong person that day. Now, I only hope to have the courage to stand, bow my head, and say thank you for living that way." Her teacher, Miss Greer, created a curriculum titled Recognition Beyond Records, soon adopted district-wide. Albert's humble strength even moved federal agencies. The Veterans Affairs Department formed a new division to investigate cases like his, where service was real but paperwork lost. They named it the Monroe Initiative. On Albert's 91st birthday, a quiet gathering formed on his front lawn. No journalists. General Beck arrived in casual clothes, carrying a cake. The museum director brought a guest book filled with thousands of visitor signatures. 7 students showed up with handwritten thank you notes. Albert greeted each guest with surprised humility. When someone asked what it felt like to be acknowledged after so long, he paused and said, "We didn't serve for recognition. We served because sometimes standing aside just isn't an option." The true heroes never returned. I just tried to honor them the best I could. As the small celebration continued, Albert looked toward his American flag, still raised and lowered daily with perfect precision. Some habits, once forged in duty, never fade. Some heroes don't need medals or parades, just someone to remember they lived and quietly chose to do what was right. When I first heard about Mr. Monroe, I couldn't stop thinking of my own grandfather, who also served quietly, never asking for praise. He always said the greatest honor was returning home with a story, not a medal. Seeing Monroe denied entry broke something inside me. But when that general saluted him, it healed something too. Maybe we don't need fireworks, just someone who sees us when it counts. If you know someone like Mr. Monroe, share this with them. They deserve to know their story still matters. The old man stood at the museum doors holding a worn photograph. The ticket agent didn't glance at it, only repeating, "No ID, no admission." A few students chuckled as he turned and walked away. 3 minutes later, a military vehicle arrived. Out stepped a 4-star general in white gloves, headed straight for the old man. Why would a general bow his head for someone denied entry to a museum?